Hi everybody, it's Matt here, local friendly neighbourhood vestibular migraine sufferer. So I just want to do a video covering a subject that's been on my mind for some time. I've been aware of it and spoken about it to fellow sufferers and non-sufferers as well. And it's the whole topic of how the weather can affect your vestibular disorder or your vestibular migraine. So I think the first thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about how the weather could influence your symptoms is the weather is of course things we can see. So we can see the light, we can see the rain, but it's also things we can't see, such as pressure or the wind, for example. You can't actually see the wind, can you? So there'll be a couple of things potentially at play there. So visible things and also invisible things to the human eye. I think the other caveat we just need to set out as well before we get into this is, I think we could paint a very bleak picture by listing off top 10 list of different weather conditions that might affect your vestibular disorder or vestibular symptoms, and essentially you'll look at that list and you think, well, that's every kind of weather we'll ever experience in any given day. So it becomes basically useless, that list, doesn't it, really? So there's not things on there you can avoid or try and mitigate, because if everything's going to upset you in the weather, then there's nothing you can do about it. So I won't go too far down that road in terms of making a massive list of types of weather. So I'm just going to focus it in on two to three kind of key ones that make sense to me that they would affect or potentially trigger vestibular disorder and vestibular disorder symptoms. So the first one, probably the most obvious one, if you were like me when I was in my chronic phase of vestibular migraine, the light was really horrible for me. I was at the time very photophobic, so very sensitive to light, so much that it would just overload me. It would overload my senses, and then of course I had with that the motion sensitivity, so my senses were getting overloaded basically, and they couldn't cope with it. If you're experiencing that, then you have my sympathy, because it is awful. But then what you will find, probably if you were like me, is that you struggled with a few aspects of light, really. The first one would be I used to struggle when it was dull outside, and that sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? It's kind of the flip reverse of a bright sunshine. But when it was dull outside, what would happen is, if you're inside, then the electric light starts to take over more, and they are known triggers for migraines, as we know. It's the blue and green wavelengths are known to being standard migraine triggers, and it, of course, then is a bad influence on the vestibular migraine symptoms around photophobia. So the light goes dimmer, those electric lights kick in more and are more noticeable, makes you feel worse, obviously. Some people will say that they really struggle when it's really bright sun, and I get that, because I'm sensitive to sunshine, really. So I always have my sunglasses on. I pretend it's because I want to be rock star, but actually it is because I do struggle when it's really bright outside. But that's something I've had for years, and it's not something that I would attribute to a vestibular disorder, but some people it certainly will be. So when you're outside and it's blazing sun and it's all bright, then that's bound to also have an effect on some people for their vestibular symptoms around photophobia. But I found it weird, don't know why, but I found that during my chronic phase of vestibular migraine, which was in the summertime, that actually being outside was better for it. It just felt the light just wasn't quite as disruptive to me as it was when I was in an inside situation, like in a supermarket. Just one of those weird quirks. Some people may have that same thing happen to them, but other people might find it worse for them outside. So then, kind of linked to the light, is the next kind of thing I think that's worth talking about in terms of the weather, is when you get changes in the seasons. So we had joy, we had fun, we had seasons in the sun, 4 seasons a year, certainly in the Western Hemisphere. I can't speak for all countries and all parts of the globe, but you've got those 4 main seasons. And what I've noticed, and other vestibular sufferers have noticed, is that when you get that change in season, so when you're moving from the end of the winter into the springtime, and then if it's the other side of the year, when you're moving kind of from the summer into the autumn, for me, the kind of light quality changes in the UK, and that I have noticed does make, sometimes I'll think, oh, the light's not great for me today, and then there'll be hints of the vestibular symptoms. Again, tends to be the kind of slightly photophobic, a bit of derealization kind of things that it will make me trigger. So and I always associate, so in the UK, we alter the clocks twice a year. So in the springtime, they go forward, in the wintertime, they go back. And I always notice it when that happens, because obviously the part of the day you're in, the light quality will be different to what it was the day before. So, and that links nicely onto my next topic, next main influencing factor of the weather is when you get sudden changes in weather. So if it's a really nice bright day, whatever, nice sunshine, you've got your speedos on and you're out chilling in your garden, on your balcony, wherever it may be, and then suddenly that big cloud comes over and suddenly the light quality changes. So particularly noticeable if you're at the cricket, for cricket fans out there, that sudden change in light, it's quite rapid, is not, you can't, it's not like you have a slow build up to it. So maybe your body can sort of adapt to that light a bit like it would do as if you were, I don't know, if you were, as it does in sunset, as it gradually goes dark. If it's sudden, that can obviously be a bit of a trigger for the kind of photophobia, derealization, visual side of vestibular disorder. And I have noticed that as well. Only occasionally, because it's probably in the UK we're quite used to sudden change in weather, because suddenly it can basically piss it down when it's been bright sun, literally like that. So that's kind of my third one, and then I think kind of the fourth one I want to talk about, and as I said at the start, there's probably a few other ones, but for me it's kind of, well, it's kind of two of them, but they're linked together quite nicely. So it's changes in altitude and also pressure changes. So this would be where you have an effect of the weather that we can't see. So we've spoken about things we can see, which is predominantly being light so far. But what you can't see are things like atmospheric pressures and winds and things like that. So that atmospheric pressure obviously can change, and some migraine sufferers of regular migraine report that is a problem and can trigger their symptoms. And I've not heard anyone say it with vestibular migraine, but I would imagine there are people out there. So if the atmosphere changes and that happens, I don't know the medical scientific reason exactly what might be going off there. I can only speculate because I'm not a doctor, but I would imagine the pressure change, kind of you feeling it in your ears and that sort of thing, as you do if you're going in an aeroplane. So that for me is, if I'm right, I might be wrong, but if I'm right, then that's pretty obvious, isn't it, that it's going to affect things like your balance or your vestibular system, because it's that kind of pressure within the ears. And then the other one is altitude. It's not really a weather, is it really? It's kind of a height you go to, but obviously if you changes in height, you get changes in pressure, but also changes in weather. So if you fly above the clouds, then you're not going to get rained on, are you? So again, I would imagine that links to kind of pressure changes within your ear, which are then a trigger for migraine symptoms, and then logically will trigger probably some people's vestibular migraine symptoms. So they're kind of the main ones I want to talk about. As I said, I've read lists out there before that have like almost like they have so much weather stuff on there. It's basically any weather you can ever experience anywhere ever. So that's not helpful to me particularly. So what I've tried to do here is just focus on the main ones that seem to me, in my opinion. And again, this is just my experiences and my opinions. It's not anything medical. It's not anything. I'm not the oracle, but in my opinion, I've picked on the ones there that I think will be the most influential based on my experience as a vestibular migraine sufferer. So that's the changes in light, that's the atmospheric pressures, altitude, and also linked to that is the sudden changes in the seasons, sudden changes in light, and then changes in the seasons, which is more gradual. So they're the ones that I've certainly noticed have had some kind of influence on me in terms of my vestibular symptoms. So that's why I'm sticking to those rather than doing some full list of, as I said, every weather condition you've got going. I think on that one it even said like snow. Well, yeah, that's obvious, isn't it? Because it's more of a glare if it's sunshine. I think it had like sandstorms. Well, I don't think sandstorms is particularly good for any condition, let alone migraines or vestibular migraines, and it's certainly not good for your car engine and your exhaust. But anyway, so they're my main ones. So changes in light, obviously changes in the seasons, and pressures, I think for me are the main ones that are a lot more likely to influence your vestibular symptoms. So how to finally just come on how we mitigate against those things then. So as I've got into habit, as I said, I think I said it in the video, I pretty much always have sunglasses on when I go out. except on a very, very dull or rainy day. And people, as I said, people probably think I'm walking around like some kind of wannabe rock star prick, but actually it's because I do struggle with the light. So mitigation, have some sunglasses with you for if you get though that it's too, for if it's going to be too bright for you, or or if there's a sudden change when you're wearing sunglasses, it'll have less of an effect on your photophobia. Of course, FL41s are the other option, particularly if you're going to be going inside more in around electronic lights. The other ones, in terms of sudden changes in weather, there's not an awful lot you can do really in that. It's just, I guess, just brace yourself really. Maybe look at the weather forecast as well. It's a really obvious tip, isn't it? And in terms of the changing seasons, again, this will depend on where you live. There's not an awful lot you can do about that. But it's, guess again, it's sort of bracing yourself for it and that kind of thing. And then in terms of the pressures, well, imagine where you get, sudden atmospheric changes and pressures on your ears and things is in aeroplanes. So if you are flying as a vestibular disorder sufferer, some of the common tips you do to try and mitigate that. So have your ears covered. So if I go in a plane, because I hate flying, I always have loud rock music on anyway in my headphones, so that mitigates the effect. Or earplugs, obviously. And then I don't know whether it's an old sort of myth, but sucking a sweet or chewing on a sweet is supposed to help with that pressure effect on your ears. I have no idea whether that works or not. It's a bit, let's say, an old fable really. So hopefully that was a useful video. I said there's plenty of lists out there about how the weather can affect you, so you feel free to Google it. As I said, I've just narrowed in on the ones that I think are most likely to affect a vestibular disorder. So I hope that was useful. I keep saying I've got videos coming up, which I have. It's just I've been exceptionally busy lately with my personal life and my work life, so I've not had too much time to get some done. But I've got a few to do. I've mentioned the one which is about coping at a rock concert. I've got one that's going to be coping at the pub. Quite enjoyable subjects, really, aren't they? It's almost like a perk of the job, I suppose. And then I've been asked a few times by sufferers, one chap in particular, I won't name him, but he particularly wants me to do a video on how to kind of manage yourself at the gym if you are struggling with vestibular symptoms. And that is one I will do, and I do want to do. But I've kind of probably just got to get permission from my gym first, because if they see me filming, they might think I'm like filming the girls in their tight lycra or whatever, and I could then get banned, and that's no good for everybody, is it? So I need to ask permission before I do that. But just if I do it, it won't be about, I won't be passing on sort of fitness tips in terms of form and that kind of thing, because I'm sure, well, I'm not a personal trainer, but it would be more about how I cope when I'm in that gym situation. So I'll leave it there. I've rambled on long enough. It's gone on for nearly 12 minutes. So I will also be, sorry, just before I finish, I will also be doing a bit of an update to my theory of everything videos, which of course, where I put together and try and piece together to come up with a hypothesis about what's going on with vestibular migraine, what's causing it. And I tend to use that little gingerbread man to describe it. So as I learn more, there's always then new things that can go into that kind of blender to try and sort of come to a nice kind of definitive, if we can ever get to that definitive kind of map or portfolio of what can cause vestibular migraine and exactly what is going on with it. What if I am experiencing breathing difficulties? Is that necessarily something that's a result of the vestibular migraine? I don't think so. Result of something else that vestibular disturbance, whatever it may be, disturbance of the central nervous system is causing. So cause and effect, that kind of thing. So anyway, I've rambled on long enough. Take care, and remember, as you were, you'll be again soon. Ta-da.